We are on top of breaking news in Minneapolis tonight. We have reports that federal agents were involved in a non-fatal shooting. There's now a massive police presence in the area, as you can see on your screen, along with protesters and observers. Folks, there is still a lot that we do not know. The Department of Homeland Security claims that law enforcement was conducting a targeted traffic stop of an undocumented immigrant and that the driver took off and later crashed his vehicle. They claim the officer caught up to him on foot and that a struggle took place, which ultimately involved two more people from a nearby apartment. At one point, this is according to a DHS official, they claim the officer fired defensive shots, hitting the original subject in the leg. They go on to claim that the officer and the subject are both in the hospital and that the two people who ran out of the apartment are in custody. Again, that is all according to the Department of Homeland Security and a statement it issued less than 2 hours after the incident. By the way, it's important to note today marks 1 week since an ICE agent shot and killed Renee Good. Responding to the incident on social media, Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche wrote the following, quote, Minnesota insurrection is a direct result of a failed governor and a terrible mayor encouraging violence against law enforcement. It's disgusting. Waltz and Frey, I'm focused on stopping you from your terrorism by whatever means necessary. This is not a threat. It's a promise. A stunning statement from the Deputy Attorney General. MS Now's Jillian Frankel joins us from Minneapolis. Jillian, I know you've been out there all evening since this news broke. I just laid out what the Department of Homeland Security has said. Tell us what the situation is like where you are and if there's any new information.
Simone, is still a very active and chaotic scene here on the ground in northern Minneapolis. I want to show you just seconds before you came to us. These federal agents took someone to the ground right on this corner here. I'm going to have my photographer show you, and there's still a gathering of them now. These protesters, these locals have run up. These agents are just there on that corner here. We've been continuing to see flashbangs. We saw pepper balls being deployed earlier. It's a very chaotic scene. I want you to just continue to watch as this unfolds, as these protesters converge on these federal agents. I just want you to continue to watch. It's a very chaotic, active scene here.
Jillian, are the crowds growing?
To just monitor, yeah.
Are the crowds growing? Are people leaving the area?
The crowds are sort of moving. We actually started further down. I would say now there are still many people, as you can see, moving in on this area just in front of us here. But certainly the crowds, I would say, are sort of spreading across the area here, along the suburban area of northern Minneapolis, Simone.
And Jillian, the area that you are in that this is taking place, what can you tell us about the area, the number of law enforcement or estimate of number of law enforcement agents that are still in that area? This looks to be residential by my estimates, but you've been in the area for a few hours now.
Yeah, it's a residential area in northern Minneapolis. In terms of the federal agents, it's a bit hard to tell. We've certainly seen dozens of them blocking intersections here, trying to keep this crowd back. There's also, obviously, they're in these vehicles moving, and many are on foot as well. But I would say somewhere in the dozens just in this area. There was earlier crime scene tape as they were trying to sort of block off parts of this area. Now, obviously, you can see these vehicles are moving through here, but in terms of rough estimate, I'd say in the dozens for now.
Thank you, Jillian. We appreciate your reporting. We'll let you go. Come back to us if you have any breaking news. Folks, we did just learn from the city of Minneapolis that the injury to the man who was shot is not considered life-threatening. We also learned that the mayor and the police chief of Minneapolis plan to hold a news conference in about 15 minutes. We will, of course, bring it to you live as it happens. As I mentioned, today does mark 1 week since an ICE agent shot and killed Renee Good in Minneapolis. And I want you to consider this. There could soon be 3,000 federal immigration agents in that city. That's 5 times the manpower of the Minneapolis Police Department and nearly equal to the total number of officers in the region's 10 largest law enforcement agencies combined. It's also equal to about 1 agent for every 1,000 people living in the Twin Cities. And that's according to the Minneapolis Tribune. That could help explain why today we heard Minneapolis officials call it an, quote, invasion and a, quote, occupation as they told ICE to get out of their city. State and local officials have filed a lawsuit to curb the agency's presence there. And today, a federal judge put off making an immediate ruling to do just that. The judge gave the federal government until Monday to file its response to the lawsuit. With that, let's bring in our midweek nightcap. Sabrina Siddiqui is here, national politics reporter with the Wall Street Journal. Leanne Caldwell, chief Washington correspondent for Puck. Sam Stein, managing editor for The Bulwark and MS Now political contributor. And veteran Washington correspondent John Harwood. He's a distinguished fellow at Duke University and columnist for Zateo on Substack. Also with us is Barbara McQuaid. She's a veteran federal prosecutor and former U.S. attorney for the Eastern District of Michigan. I just want to remind you all, if I interrupt anyone, it is, in fact, because we're going to go to that press conference. Barb, I want to start with you, and I want to start in Minnesota. You have worked along federal law enforcement, especially in light of what happened tonight. What does it do to a local community when you have this overwhelming force of outside law enforcement come in like this?
Simone, it seems to me sort of the worst practices of law enforcement. So much of what law enforcement needs to be effective is the trust of the community that it serves. I once had a police chief say to me that the most important thing a law enforcement leader can do is to bring calm to chaos, to try to get the public to work together with law enforcement to achieve mutual goals. After all, we are the governed, the people and the law enforcement need to work together through community policing. When you instead have the appearance of an occupying army trying to harm the very people it's intended to serve, it creates that chaotic situation that endangers the public, the suspects, and the law enforcement agents themselves. I'm sure there are ICE agents who are out there who are not enjoying this assignment whatsoever because of the situation they have been put into that is so toxic.
Barb, as folks can see on the screen, there are a lot of people out on the streets of Minneapolis tonight. There have been folks out on the streets of Minneapolis throughout the course of the last week, just trying to record and even just observe what ICE is doing. Yesterday in federal court, a Department of Justice attorney argued that there is no First Amendment protection for observing police. I was struck by this. What is your reaction to that assertion?
Yeah, one, it's an open question. And two, I think the better argument is that, of course, there is. What they're relying on is a finding by the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals, which does cover Minnesota, that said it was not a clearly established right. That came up in a different context where somebody was suing a law enforcement official in a civil matter. So I think it's not dispositive of the issue here. The strong argument that was made by amici in that case and by the plaintiff is that, of course, there is a First Amendment right. If there's a First Amendment right to report the news, there must similarly be a First Amendment right to collect that news. Now, certainly people don't have a right to interfere with law enforcement officers. If they're asked to step aside, clear some space, make sure that law enforcement officers are able to do their jobs, that's one thing. But to say you don't have a right to record what's happening, that's nonsense.
Sam, let me come to you, because Donald Trump seems to be very good at picking issues and very bad at picking solutions. And it would seem to me that Americans did want some action on immigration enforcement in this country, whether they lived on the border, whether they lived in the middle of the country. It doesn't seem to me that Americans signed up for these videos that we are seeing. We've got some shocking new videos from the streets of Minneapolis every single day. And then you have Joe Rogan, of all people, comparing this to the Gestapo. What say you about what's playing out in the streets of America?
Well, it's heartbreaking, right? I mean, what you're seeing now is a major U.S. city basically being invaded by the federal government agents against the will of a lot of people there, and of course the elected leadership there. And I can't get over that Todd Blanche statement. I mean, if you read between the lines, he called both the governor and the mayor say they're engaging acts of terrorism. So we're at a place where I don't think we've ever been, at least in the modern era. And then you are referencing the political backlash to this, which I think is actually quite profound. I mean, you look in the polling now and numbers of people who say they're not supportive of the actions of ICE are skyrocketing. There's a couple polls out there now where people are saying they support the abolition of ICE more so than they oppose it, which is shocking to me considering where we were 2 years ago, 1 year ago in the conventional wisdom there. And as you referenced, Joe Rogan and others coming out against this. It doesn't mean that Donald Trump isn't fine with this. I mean, I think Trump doesn't particularly mind these visuals. I think he likes the idea that they are cracking down on some bad guys, and I think he likes the pretext to go after it further. But it could also be that they are dramatically overplaying their hand politically here.
And I just want to note for people who are watching on the screen, what folks just saw while you were speaking, Sam, is it seems to be protesters engaging with some local law, some law enforcement. We don't know if they are federal agents. It seems to be federal agents. This is playback right now. But Sabrina, I mean, this is just one instance in Minneapolis and one protest. We saw this play out in Chicago. We saw similar images playing out in Los Angeles, right here in Washington, D.C. If you look at the polls, the majority of Americans actually who have been asked, they think the shooting of Renee Good was unjustified. Meanwhile, you have a former ICE agent of about 25 years of experience telling Time magazine this. I'm going to read it. Quote, "I'm embarrassed. The majority of my colleagues feel the same way. It's an insult to us because we did it the right way to see what they are doing now." You're talking to folks all the time. Are mainstream Republicans, are they proud of what they're seeing play out right now?
I don't think that they're proud of it. And look, you have the polling that exists on immigration as a broader issue where President Trump still performs fairly strongly if you're talking about border security. But when you look at ICE, what we've seen in our polling at the Wall Street Journal, and it's reflected in polling elsewhere, is even before the events that we're seeing unfold right now in Minneapolis and before the killing of Renee Good, the American public, increasing majority of the American public, felt like the tactics that were being deployed by ICE were going too far. They didn't like, and I've heard this from voters, I've heard it from pollsters, I've heard it from people who voted for President Trump. They didn't like seeing ICE agents patrolling their neighborhoods and picking up people who are working in restaurants and showing up at people's schools and just arresting their neighbors and apprehending people off the streets. And so that's where I think the Trump administration had already overplayed their hand. And now you see the kind of escalation and the scenes that are unfolding in Minneapolis. One thing I do want to highlight is, we all witnessed the shooting of Renee Good because it's on video. My colleagues at the Wall Street Journal produced an investigation where there have been 13 instances where immigration agents have fired at or into civilian vehicles since July alone. 8 people who were shot, 2 people, including Renee Good, who were killed. 5 of the people involved in these incidents were U.S. citizens. And what we're seeing is not just, poor training for a lot of these agents who are out there, but their actions being supported and almost encouraged by the administration, which is why I think this is really just the beginning.
Leanne, I want to go to the point about ICE, and Sam noted you do have some folks now who are talking about perhaps we do need to abolish ICE, but when you talk to Democratic elected officials, particularly folks in leadership, Democratic leadership in the House and Senate, they are saying abolish is too far. I spoke with Jared Moskowitz tonight on our show on the weeknight. They're not for abolish, but they are for reining in. Congress did infuse about $170 billion in the One Big Beautiful Bill to ICE just last year.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up the money, because the amount of money that Congress appropriated for border security and interior enforcement is worth 3 years of regular funding that they usually get. And that is just in this one bill. That does not include the appropriations process that Congress is currently fighting over right now for DHS because of these incidents. And yeah, so Democrats are trying to figure out the dynamics within their caucus of how far they're willing to go. Yes, there is unanimous support among Democrats to bring in some sort of accountability, guidelines, requirements for ICE. They want to do that through the appropriations bill that is still outstanding. We'll see if they get there. Republicans haven't come to the table on that. But there's also proposals on Capitol Hill to impeach Kristi Noem by Democrats, which obviously they are in the minority. That is not going to happen right now. And again, to abolish ICE. But I will say, Republicans at this point still feel fairly confident that those positions of abolishing ICE, impeaching Noem, of criticizing ICE agents is bad politics for Democrats. We'll see where this goes. I think that they might be misjudging a little bit too early. But right now it is a campaign issue that Republicans are imposing on this for sure.
John, I want to go back to the statement from the Deputy Attorney General of the United States. He called he said what was happening in Minnesota as insurrection, and then he blamed it on Governor Walz and the mayor of Minneapolis, Mayor Frey, and he's calling it terrorism. I'm struck by this. These words carry weight. They mean something. And these are lofty accusations coming from the Department of Justice tonight.
Look, I think, of course, we all cover politics and we're talking about politics. This is something that's much bigger than politics. I really think we're in almost a dystopian situation right now. We have a presidential aide, Stephen Miller, consumed with fanatical hatred of immigrants, particularly those with brown skin. You have a president who has a narcissistic need to dominate others, and the toxic interaction between those two people is firing an administration agenda that, at its core right now, is about white supremacy enforced by violence. The administration does not want the violence to end. They are doing this purposefully. The president, at any moment, could turn down the temperature, withdraw, calm the situation. He does not want to do that. And the question all of us have to ask is, what is going to cause this fire to burn out? What is going to cause him to get on to the next thing and back off? We don't know the answer.
We do not know the answer to that. And I do think that's a question many folks across this country, frankly, especially if they're seeing these images coming out of Minneapolis, are asking tonight. Here's the thing. The administration, Sam, you know, I listen to all the things they're saying. I watched the Fox News clips. I was watching Fox News myself the other day, and I was like, wait, is this happening? I had to turn back the channels just to juxtapose what was going on. But I was very, very struck by this language that I've been hearing from Stephen Miller and then echoed on administration accounts, specifically around the issue that if you are a federal officer, if you're a federal agent out there doing your job, and this is Stephen Miller, he said this on Fox just last night, that if anyone touches you, if they impede what you are doing, if they try to obstruct your duty, he said it was a felony. And he said, we want our officers to know, our federal agents, that they have immunity. Yeah. And it's something that I've seen echoed from many of the administration accounts across social media. And to me, that says, like, the political operator in me is like, oh, the images are bad. You want the people to know that, hey, we're not trying to turn on Americans. We want to refocus conversation. But that's not what they're doing here. And I just don't understand why.
First of all, you shouldn't consume all the information.
I know. I've called my therapist, Sam.
You got to log off every now and then, just to be clear. Secondly, the immunity line really did stick out to me because, I mean, there's not really much of another read other than, hey, guys, you have carte blanche to go out and do whatever you want to do, and we'll get your back. And the reason it's so profound and important is because we now know that this president has been using the pardon power in ways that no other president prior to this. I mean, there's a certain irony, right, that he came in and he immediately pardoned all the people who rioted against the Capitol Police.
All
and
the
that
January
was
6th.
hanging out a pardon for the police who are going after the people of Minneapolis. I mean, that's ironic in its own stuff. But I think the larger issue is the perversion of the system of justice and Justice Department, which is they're basically, you know, the Justice Department at this point is just more or less the president's law firm. And the president himself is saying to anyone who's in a federal agency, just do what you want because the Justice Department won't prosecute.